Abigail Carter slammed the kitchen door shut with flour still caked to her knuckles, her chest heaving because the woman in the white dress had just called her a name. No living soul should be called, and 200 guests had laughed. She did not cry. She reached for her knife. She kept slicing. Because the people who pretended she did not exist were still waiting on her bread. Before we go on, subscribe to this channel, stay with Abigail's story all the way to the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The first thing they told Abigail Carter when she stepped off the back of the supply wagon was that she was not to use the front door. "Not now, not ever," said Mrs. Holloway. The housekeeper, a thin woman with a face like a closed ledger. "The guests come and go through the front. You come and go through the kitchen yard. You understand me, Mrs. Carter?" "I understand you fine," Abigail said. "Good. Then we'll get along." Mrs. Holloway looked her up and down slow, the way a person studies livestock at auction. "They told me you were big. They didn't tell me how big." Abigail held her 2 flour sacks and said nothing. "I'll need you to keep to the corners," Mrs. Holloway went on. "We've got narrow halls and a great many silver trays going through them. A woman your size knocking things over. I've cooked in tighter kitchens than this one, ma'am, and I never broke a dish yet. See that you don't start." Mrs. Holloway turned on her heel. "Come along, and keep your voice down. Miss Beaumont can't abide noise from the help." Abigail followed her across the yard with her sacks held against her chest, and she kept her chin level, and she did not let her face do anything at all. She had learned that. A widow learned that fast. Inside the kitchen, there was a girl, maybe 16, with red hands and a scared way of standing, who looked up from a basin of potatoes and went still. "This is Tessa," Mrs. Holloway said. "She'll fetch and carry. She won't talk back, will you, Tessa?" "No, ma'am. Mrs. Carter is the cook for the wedding, 3 days' work. She'll be gone by Sunday, and we'll none of us have to think about her again." Mrs. Holloway said this without cruelty, which was somehow worse the way a person reads off a list of chores. "The banquet is for 200. Mr. Walker spares no expense. You'll have everything you ask for in supplies and nothing you ask for in thanks. Are we clear?" "We're clear. One more thing." The housekeeper stopped in the doorway. "You're not to be seen." Miss Beaumont was particular on this point. No guest is to lay eyes on the woman who made the food. The cook stays behind that door from the morning of the wedding until the last plate is cleared. If you're spotted in the halls, you'll forfeit your wage. Those are her words, not mine. Abigail set her sacks down on the long table. "Why?" "I'm sorry. Why's she so set on nobody seeing me?" For half a second something flickered in Mrs. Holloway's closed ledger face. Then it shut again. "Miss Beaumont likes things a certain way? It's not my place to ask, and it's surely not yours." She left. Tessa waited until her steps had faded. Then she whispered, "Don't take it hard, ma'am. She talks like that to everybody." "She talked like that to you about your size." The girl flushed. "No, ma'am. Then she don't talk to everybody the same." Abigail rolled up her sleeves. "Pass me that basin. Those potatoes won't peel theirselves, and I've got 100 more under the porch." They worked through the first day, mostly in silence, which suited Abigail. She didn't come here for company. She came here because Tom was 3 years in the ground, and the farm was failing the way she was failing, slow and quiet, and with nobody watching, and $40 for 3 days cooking was $40 she did not have. That was the whole of it. There was no other reason on God's earth a woman would let herself be hidden behind a door like something shameful. By evening, she had the bread sponge set and the hams down in brine, and her back ached in the old places, and she was wiping down the table when the door from the main house opened and a man came in. She didn't know. He was tall and dressed plain for a rich man. No jewelry, his hat in his hand already, which she noticed because most men didn't bother taking off their hats for a cook. "Evening," he said. "Didn't mean to startle anybody. I was after coffee." Tessa shot up straight as a fence post. "Mr. Walker, I'll fetch it, sir. I'll bring it to the study." "I can drink it in here, Tessa. It won't poison me." He looked at Abigail. "You'd be the cook." I would. Ethan Walker. He did not put out his hand, but he gave a small nod, the kind a man gives an equal. This is my place. My wedding you're cooking. Congratulations to you, Abigail said in a voice that gave nothing away. He almost smiled at that. You don't sound like you mean it. I don't know you well enough to mean it or not, Mr. Walker. I just got here this morning. That's honest. He pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down in her kitchen like he had a right to, which he did. But most of them acted like they did, and he was the first who acted like it was no special thing. What's your name? Abigail Carter. Mrs. or Miss? Mrs. My husband's passed. I'm sorry to hear it. Most folks say that. You don't have to. I said it because I meant it, Ethan said. I lost my mother last winter. People say sorry to you like they're closing a door. I'm not closing any door. Abigail looked at him properly for the first time. Tessa had set the coffee in front of him and scurried back to her potatoes, and he wrapped both hands around the cup and didn't drink it. And there was something tired around his eyes that money hadn't fixed. What do you want, Mr. Walker? She said. Coffee. You've got that. What do you want from me? He turned the cup a slow quarter turn. You smelled the bread sponge when I walked in. I've got a French cook coming Friday for the fancy work, and 3 girls hired for serving, and I've got a kitchen that smelled like nothing my whole life until tonight. He looked up. What is that? The smell. Yeast working, salt rising sponge. It'll be sour bread by Friday, the good kind, the kind takes 3 days. She studied him. That's a strange thing for a man to walk into his own kitchen and ask. My mother baked, he said. Before we had money, she's the only person ever made this house smell like that. He set the cup down. I'll let you work. He stood and put his hat back on, and at the door he stopped. Mrs. Carter, do you need anything for the cooking? Anything at all? I need to know how many of your 200 can't eat shellfish, how many won't touch pork, and whether your bride wants the cake plain or fancy, and nobody's told me a thing. I'll find out. And Mr. Walker. She didn't quite know why she said it. Your housekeeper says I'm not to be seen. By anybody. That an order from you? His jaw moved. No, he said. That's not from me. Then he was gone, and Tessa let out a breath she'd been holding and said, He never comes in here. Not once since I've been hired. Well, Abigail said, and went back to her table. Maybe he likes coffee. But she stood a moment longer than she needed to, looking at the door he'd gone through. He came back the next morning before the sun was full up. Abigail had been at it 2 hours already, her hands deep in the dough, and she heard the door and didn't turn. You're early, Mr. Walker. So are you. The chair scraped. Don't let me stop you. I won't. She turned the dough out and began to work it, heel of her hand, driving forward. Fold, turn, drive, the rhythm of it older than she was. You watching me knead bread for entertainment, or have you got a reason? I got a question if you'll allow it. Coffee's by the stove. Allow yourself. He poured his own this time. She heard it. When he sat back down, he said, How'd you learn? To cook for 200. That's not a thing a person picks up. My mother fed harvest crews. 40 men twice a day, 6 weeks a season from when I was 9. Drive, fold, turn. You learn to cook for 40 hungry men who'll cuss you if it's late and cuss you if it's cold. You can cook for 200 who'll be too polite to cuss you at all. And your husband? Did he? Tom ran cattle, small herd, 40 head good year. She didn't slow her hands. He didn't cook, he ate. What happened to the herd? Same thing happens to everything out here. A hard winter, then a dry summer, then a man works himself into the grave trying to make up the difference, and then there's a widow and a mortgage, and $40 looks like a fortune. She slapped the dough into the bowl harder than she meant. You ask a lot of questions for a man getting married Friday. I do, he agreed. My mother said it was my worst habit, asking. She said most folks want to be left alone. A pause. But she said the ones worth knowing don't mind being asked. Abigail covered the bowl with a cloth and finally looked at him. He had his hat off again. The coffee steamed in his hands. You always this curious about the help, Mr. Walker, or am I something special? You're the first person's been in my house in a year who looked at me like I was a man and not a bank, he said simply. Mrs. Holloway sees a paycheck. Tessa sees somebody who can fire her. My ranch hands see a boss. He turned the cup. You looked at me like I was nobody in particular. I can't tell you what a relief that is. Something turned over in Abigail's chest that she pushed down hard, because she knew that turning, and she had no business feeling it, 3 days before this man stood up in front of God and married another woman. You ought to drink your coffee before it's cold, she said. And you ought to go on. I've got brine to check and the French cook coming, and I don't need it told around that the cook's keeping the groom from his morning. He stood. Reckon you're right. At the door again, he stopped. Again. Mrs. Carter. The thing about not being seen, Holloway's order or Charlotte's, it doesn't sit right with me. I want you to know that. It don't have to sit right with you, Abigail said. It's your wedding. It's my house. A man can own a house and still not run what happens in the kitchen of it. She said it before she thought, and saw it land, and saw something close behind his eyes, the way a door closes. I'm sorry. That weren't my place. No, he said slowly. No, it was true. That's a different thing than out of place. And he left. The bride came an hour after that. Charlotte Beaumont did not knock. She came through the kitchen door in a riding habit the color of money, with 2 women trailing her, and she stopped in the middle of the floor and looked around like she'd found something dead under the porch. So this is it, she said to no one. This is where the food comes from. Her eyes found Abigail and stopped and traveled head to foot, slow and deliberate, and her lip did a small thing. And this is the cook. Morning, Miss Beaumont, Abigail said. I've been hoping you'd come. I need to know about the cake and whether— I don't discuss food with the help. I discuss it with Mrs. Holloway, and she discusses it with you, and that way I don't have to come in here again. Charlotte's gaze went over Abigail's apron, her arms, her whole self, and her voice went sweet in the way that's the opposite of sweet. Mrs. Holloway told you the rule, I trust, about staying out of sight. She told me. I want to be very clear because I find clarity saves everyone embarrassment. Charlotte stepped closer. The 2 women behind her watched. On Friday, this house will be full of the finest families between here and Cheyenne. Senator Hale is coming, the Ashbys, people who matter, and not one of them is going to see a— She paused, choosing, and the choosing was the cruelty, a woman like you carrying out a tray. The food will appear as if by magic. You will stay behind that door. Do we have an understanding? Tessa had gone white in the corner. Abigail kept her hands folded on her apron and her voice flat and even. We have an understanding, Miss Beaumont. Your 200 guests won't lay eyes on me. Good. Charlotte turned to go, then turned back because some people can't help themselves. It's nothing personal, you understand. It's simply a matter of presentation. A wedding is a picture. And you, the smile, you are not in the picture. She left, and her women left, and the door swung, and for a long moment the kitchen was quiet, except for the brine bucket dripping. Then Tessa said in a tiny voice, Ma'am, that weren't right. What she said. That weren't right at all. It was honest anyhow, Abigail said. She unfolded her hands. They were steady. She made sure of that. Pass me the bowl. The sponge wants turning. How do you not— Tessa stopped. If somebody said that to me, I'd cry myself sick. You want to know how? Abigail set the bowl down between them and looked at the girl, and her voice was not unkind, but it had iron in it. You let them call you small inside your own head. You've done their work for them. They can't make you nothing, Tessa. Only you can do that. So you don't. You stand there, and you let it roll off, and then you make the finest bread in the territory, and you let the bread say what your mouth can't. She uncovered the sponge. It had risen fragrant and alive. There, smell that. That's mine. They can hide me in a closet, and they'll still be eating my work with their mouths full, every last one of them, the senator and the Ashbys, and Miss Beaumont in her wedding dress. That's something. You hold on to something. Yes, ma'am, Tessa whispered. What Abigail did not say, what she would not say to a 16-year-old girl, was that the iron was the only thing holding her up, and that under the iron, she was tired. Tired in a place that no sleep reached, tired of being a widow and a debt and a woman folks looked past on the street like she was a fence post. She had buried Tom, and she had buried the herd, and she had near about buried herself, and the only thing in 3 years that had made her feel like a living person again was a tall man with his hat in his hand asking her what made the kitchen smell like his mother's house. And that she told herself scrubbing the table that didn't need scrubbing was exactly the kind of thing that got a woman hurt. He was getting married Friday. To a woman who'd just looked at her like a stain on the floor. That was the whole arithmetic of it, and there was no figuring it any other way. She heard the kitchen door again that evening. She knew the weight of his step now, which was its own kind of warning. I told them, Ethan said before she could speak. About the shellfish and the pork. I got you the list. 11 won't touch pork, 3 can't eat shellfish, and Charlotte wants the cake plain on the outside, and... He stopped. Mrs. Carter, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Mr. Walker. You've got a face like a closed gate. Tessa's been crying in the corner. He set the list down. What happened in here today? Your bride came by. We sorted out the arrangements. Abigail kept her eyes on her work. It's fine. It's all fine. You've got your list. I've got my orders. The food'll appear like magic and disappear the same way, and I'll be gone Sunday, and you'll none of you think on me again. Mrs. Holloway's words. They're good words. They're true. Ethan was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. What did she call you? It don't matter. It matters to me. It can't matter to you, Abigail said, and now she did look up, and she let him see it just once, just for a second, the whole tired weight of it. You're marrying her Friday, so whatever she calls me, it don't matter to you, because come Sunday, I'm a woman you hired to cook, and you're a married man, and that's the size of it, and you taking off your hat in my kitchen don't change 1 inch of it. So drink your coffee, Mr. Walker, or don't. But I've got 200 to feed and 3 days to do it, and I can't be standing here talking to a groom about his bride's manners. The silence after that was so complete, she could hear the lamp hiss. Ethan picked up his hat, but he didn't put it on. He held it in both hands, turning the brim, and he looked at her like a man looking at a sum that won't come out right no matter how many times he runs it. My mother used to say, he said finally very low, that you can tell everything about a person by how they treat the help. He set his unfinished coffee on the table. I've been telling myself for a year that I could marry into the Beaumont name and keep my own. That a marriage like that is just business, and business doesn't touch the part of a man that matters. He pulled the door open. I'm not sure I believe that anymore, and I figured you of all people ought to know I said it out loud. Then he was gone, and the door swung shut behind him, and Abigail Carter stood alone in the kitchen, with her risen bread in her steady hands, and a feeling in her chest she had no name for, and no right to. 3 days before the wedding that was going to break everything wide open.
Tôi đã giữ đúng các nguyên tắc của anh, không mô tả cảnh kệ quả hành động và đối thoại tỷ lệ thoại cao ngôi thứ 3 văn phòng western, nữ chính béo phì, được khắc hoa quả phản ứng của người khác, và qua bản lĩnh gạch chéo tai nghe, chứ không qua tự ti hay mô tả ngoại hình. Nói, tiếp tục, để tôi viết fan 2 diễn biến tăng dần.
The French cook arrived Friday at dawn, and his name was Monsieur Léon, and he took one look at Abigail's risen bread and her hams and her tray of glazed birds and said something in French that made Tessa flinch. What did he say? Abigail asked, not stopping her work. Tessa swallowed. He said he didn't come all this way to share a kitchen with a... The girl couldn't finish. With a what? With a country woman who don't know a sauce from a swamp. Abigail set down her spoon and turned around and looked at the little man in his white coat. Monsieur, you speak any English? Enough, Léon said, lifting his chin. Enough to know this kitchen, it is mine now. You will do the bread, the rough work, and you will stay out of my way. That's so. Madame Beaumont, she hire me from Denver. From the finest house in Denver. You? His eyes went over her the same way they all did. You are the kitchen help. You understand the difference. I understand you've never fed 200 people in your life, Abigail said evenly, or you wouldn't be standing there talking when there's 9 hours till the banquet and you haven't so much as lit a fire. Leon's face went red. He picked up one of her glazed birds and held it up like evidence. This is peasant food. This is not for thee. Senator Hale, for the fine families. Put it down. I will throw it out, and I will start again, and— You'll put it down, Abigail said, and she did not raise her voice, but something in it made Leon's hand stop in the air. Or you'll cook for 200 all by your lonesome with no bread, no hams, and no help. And when Miss Beaumont asks why the banquet's late, I'll be sitting on the porch telling her it's because the great Denver cook threw a fit over a chicken. Now, put it down. He put it down. For a long second, nobody breathed. Then Leon muttered something and turned to his own crates, and Tessa looked at Abigail like she'd watched her wrestle a bear, and Abigail just picked her spoon back up and said, "Get the big kettle on Tessa. He's wasted enough of our morning." But it cost her. She felt it in her hands when the girl wasn't looking. The fine tremor that came after, because iron took fuel, and she'd been running on empty for 3 years, and every time she stood up straight in front of one of these people, it took something out of her she didn't have to spare. Ethan came in at mid-morning, and the kitchen was a roar by then. Tessa running the 2 extra serving girls arrived and scared Leon, banging copper, and Ethan stood in the doorway in a shirt finer than anything Abigail owned and looked lost in his own house. Mrs. Carter? I'm up to my elbows, Mr. Walker. I can see that. He didn't move. I came to say— He glanced at Leon, lowered his voice. I came to see how it was going. In here. It's going. You'll have your banquet. That's not what I asked. She wiped her hands and finally looked at him, and there was something in his face she didn't like. Something unsettled, a man standing at the edge of a thing. Mr. Walker, you're getting married in 5 hours. You ought to be with your people, not standing in a hot kitchen watching me sweat. My people. He said it like the words tasted wrong. Senator Hale cornered me an hour ago to talk about a cattle contract. At my own wedding. Charlotte's mother's been arranging the seating like she's deploying troops. Nobody in that house has said one word to me about— He stopped. About what? About whether I want any of it. He said it low and fast like a confession he hadn't meant to make. I keep walking through those rooms, and the only place in this whole house that feels like anything real is the one room I've been told to stay out of. Abigail's heart did the thing again, the turning, and she crushed it down hard. You can't say that to me. Why not? Because I'm the cook, and you're the groom, and there's a woman in a white dress upstairs counting on you, and whatever you're feeling standing in this doorway, it ain't real. It's just nerves and a smell that reminds you of your mama. And come tomorrow, you'll be glad I'm gone, and you can stop confusing the two. She turned back to her kettle. Now go, please, before somebody sees you in here and it's me that pays for it. He didn't go. He stood there 1 second too, and she could feel him there like heat off a stove. Then Mrs. Holloway's voice cut across the kitchen. Mr. Walker? There you are. Miss Beaumont is asking for you. And the housekeeper's eyes went from Ethan to Abigail and back, narrow, calculating, and Abigail watched a small, cruel understanding arrange itself behind that closed ledger face. She's been asking some while. I'll come, Ethan said. He went. But at the door he looked back the way he always did, and Mrs. Holloway saw that too. Mrs. Carter, the housekeeper said, after he'd gone crossing to her slow. A word of advice, woman to woman, which I'll give you free. Her voice dropped under the kitchen noise. Whatever notions got into your head, get it out. Men like Ethan Walker come down to the kitchen the way they go down to the stable. They like the smell of honest work. It doesn't mean they want to live in it. She let that sit. You're a clever woman and a fine cook, and I'll write you a fair character. But you take one step out of your place at this wedding, just one, and I'll see you ruined in 3 counties. Do we understand each other? We understand each other fine, Mrs. Holloway. Good. She straightened. Stay behind the door. It's the kindest thing for everybody yourself, most of all. Abigail didn't answer. She was watching her own hands roll out pastry even and sure while everything underneath them shook. The hours after that went fast, the way the worst hours always do. The serving girls learned their trays. Leon, who turned out to be able to cook when he stopped talking, plated his sauces and grudgingly admitted her hams were not entirely peasant. Tessa fetched and ran until her face shone, and through the kitchen wall all afternoon came the sounds of the house filling up wagons and carriages and voices. 200 voices, the finest families between there and Cheyenne, none of whom would ever know her name. It was an hour before the ceremony when Charlotte came in for the last time. She was in her wedding dress, and behind her came her mother, a hard, handsome woman with Charlotte's same mouth, and the two of them filled the kitchen doorway, and the whole room went quiet. I came to inspect, Charlotte said. She walked the length of the table, trailing a gloved finger, looking at the food she would take credit for. It's adequate. Her eyes lifted to Abigail. You. The arrangement holds. You understand the arrangement. I understand it, Miss Beaumont. My husband-to-be has a soft heart, Charlotte said, and the words were for Abigail, but the eyes flicked once at her mother, a daughter performing for a parent. He feels things for the lower sort that a man in his position can't afford to feel. It's a flaw. I intend to cure him of it. She came closer, and her voice went down to that sweet poison register. He's been coming to this kitchen. I know he has. Holloway told me. He comes for coffee. He comes, Charlotte said, because a man like Ethan mistakes pity for feeling, and there is a great deal in this kitchen to pity. Her gaze went over Abigail, slow, cruel, complete. But let me be plain, since plainness saves embarrassment. Whatever he says to you, whatever softness he shows you, it is nothing. You are a stop on the way to becoming who he is. He'll forget you by Monday. They always do. She smiled. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself, a woman of your size, your station, your situation. It would be very sad indeed. And there it was, the thing Mrs. Holloway had said, in kindness, said now in malice. And it landed twice as hard for being true. Because hadn't Abigail told herself the same exact words at this same table, not a day before? She felt the iron try to go. She held it. Will that be all, Miss Beaumont? Charlotte's mother spoke for the first time, a dry, cold voice. Charlotte, we don't bargain with kitchen staff. Come away. The thing knows its place. And the word thing hung in the air like a slap. Charlotte turned to go. Then, because some people truly cannot help themselves, she stopped at the door and looked back at the food, all of it. The banquet that represented 3 days of Abigail's grief and skill and emptied out strength. And she said lightly to her mother, loud enough for the whole kitchen, imagine, all this made by a fat widow nobody will ever see. There's something almost poetic in it, isn't there? The invisible making the unforgettable. And she laughed, and her mother laughed, and they went out, and the door swung shut. Tessa was crying. The serving girls stared at the floor. Even Leon had gone still over his sauces. Abigail stood at the head of the table with 200 people's dinner spread before her. And she did not cry, and she did not break, and she said in a voice scraped down to the bone but steady, Tessa, stop that now. There's no time for it. She picked up her knife. We've got a wedding to feed, and by God they're going to eat every bite of it. But her hands when she lifted the knife were not steady at all, and she had to set it down and grip the edge of the table, and breathe once, twice, 3 times before the iron came back. 3 years of being looked past, of being a widow and a debt, and a thing that knew its place, and she had taken it all without a sound, and she would take this too. She always took it. That was the terrible thing nobody understood about a woman like her. She could carry anything. She had proved it over and over. The only thing she couldn't carry was the small, cruel hope that had walked into her kitchen with its hat in its hand and made her forget for 2 mornings that she was supposed to be invisible. She would not make that mistake again. The ceremony began. Through the wall came the sound of it, the murmur of 200 a man's voice. She did not let herself listen, for the long silences, the vows. Abigail kept her crew moving. The trays were lined and ready. The bread was warm. Everything she had built stood ready to be carried out under another woman's name. And then, partway through, something changed in the sound from the other room. Tessa heard it first. She came back from the door white as flour. "Ma'am, something's wrong." The preacher stopped. He stopped ma'am in the middle, and now there's somebody talking. A man, talking loud. And nobody's saying the words back. "That's not your business, girl. Pick up your tray." "But ma'am." "Pick it up." But Abigail had gone still, the way an animal goes. Still, every nerve turned toward the wall, toward the room, full of the finest families between there and Cheyenne, toward the silence where the vows should have been, toward a single man's voice rising up over 200 others. And though she could not make out the words, she knew the weight of that step. That voice knew it, the way she'd come to know it without meaning to. Over 2 cups of coffee. And 2 mornings, she'd told herself, meant nothing. And she felt the iron in her chest crack straight down the middle, because whatever was happening on the other side of that door, she knew with a certainty that frightened her that it was happening because of her. What Ethan Walker had done in front of 200 people and a preacher with the book open in his hands was hold up one finger and say, "Wait." That was all. One word. But a man does not say wait in the middle of his own vows without the whole room leaning forward, and Tessa pressed to the crack of the kitchen door, whispered every bit of it back to Abigail in pieces. He says he wants a minute. He says there's something on his conscience he's got to settle before he says the words." And Miss Beaumont's gone white, ma'am, white as her dress, and her mother's halfway out of her seat. "Stop listening at that door." And now Miss Beaumont has took his arm, ma'am. She's leaned in close, and she's saying something quiet, smiling at everybody, and he's... Tessa. He's nodding. He stepped back in line. The preacher started up again. The girl turned from the door, deflated. Whatever it was, ma'am, she talked him out of it. Abigail let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, and hated herself for the way her chest dropped when she did. "Good," she said. "That's good. That's how it ought to be. Now pick up that tray. They'll be wanting the meal directly the words are done." But it wasn't good, and she knew it wasn't, because a man who says wait at the altar has a thing in him that one whispered sentence from Charlotte Beaumont could not kill, only delay. And Abigail had spent 3 years learning that the things you delay come back bigger. The vows finished. The room broke into applause that came through the wall like distant rain. And then the doors between the great room and the kitchen passage opened, and the serving began. And for an hour, Abigail Carter disappeared into the only thing that had never once let her down, which was the work. The trays went out and came back empty. Leon's sauces and her hams and her 3-day bread crossed the threshold under the serving girl's arms and vanished into the murmur and clink of 200 people eating the finest meal of their lives, none of whom would ever know her name. Tessa came back flushed each time. "They're eating like they've been starved, ma'am. There's a man out there said it's the best table he's sat down to since St. Louis." "That's the work talking," Abigail said, plating never stopping. "Not me. The work. They keep asking, ma'am, who made it? There's a lady real fine keeps asking the girls who the cook is." Something cold touched the back of Abigail's neck. "Tell the girls to say they don't know." "They are saying it." But she keeps on. And now... Tessa's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, she's stood up. The fine lady. She's asking Miss Beaumont, out loud, in front of everybody." "That's not our business. She's saying she's never ate bread like it in her life, and she wants to thank whoever made it, and the whole table's gone quiet listening, and... Tessa, get away from that door." But the girl was frozen, and through the wall, in a lull of the great room, a woman's voice carried clear and warm, and carrying the way a fine lady's voice is trained to carry. "Charlotte, dear, you simply must tell us. A wedding is the bride's triumph, of course, but a table like this is a triumph all its own. Who is the genius in your kitchen? I should like to steal them for my own house." And the room laughed the easy laugh of full and happy people, and waited. And in that waiting, Abigail Carter stood very still in her kitchen with a serving spoon in her hand, because she understood the way you understand a storm, before you hear the thunder, exactly what was coming. There was no good answer Charlotte could give. To name her was to put a fat widow at the center of the bride's triumph. To praise her was to share the light. And Charlotte Beaumont was not a woman who shared light. The answer came, and it carried just as clear. "Oh, you're too kind, Mrs. Ashby," Charlotte said, and there was a little laugh in it, a little performance, a woman charming a room. "But there's no genius, I'm afraid, only hired help. We brought a man down from Denver for the proper dishes. The rest, the pause, the choosing. Abigail could hear her choosing. The rest was thrown together by a fat kitchen widow from some failing farm out past the river. We keep her well out of sight. One wouldn't want the picture spoiled." And the room laughed, 200 people full and happy and laughing. I always say good food and good breeding rarely share a kitchen. The laughter rolled through the wall. Tessa spun from the door with both hands over her mouth, and Abigail Carter did not move. She stood with the spoon in her hand, and the laughter washing over her through the boards. Every voice of it, the Ashbys and the senator, and the finest families between there and Cheyenne. All of them laughing at the fat kitchen widow, whose 3-day bread was at that moment dissolving sweet on their tongues. And she did not cry, and she did not drop the spoon, and she did not make one single sound. Inside something went very quiet. Quieter than grief. Quieter than the night they'd put Tom in the ground. It was the quiet of a thing that has been asked to carry 1 pound past what it can carry, and does not break loudly, but simply finally sets itself down. "Ma'am?" Tessa whispered, crying. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, Don't." Abigail's voice came out level, and that was the worst of it, how level it was. "Don't you cry for me, girl, not in my kitchen." She set the spoon down with great care as though it might shatter. "Plate the dessert. The cake goes out whole, and we cut it at the table same as always. They'll want it. Folks always want sweet after they've had their fill of cruel." "How can you—" Tessa choked. "How are you just standing there? Because standing's the only thing left to do." And Abigail picked up the cake knife, and her hand did not shake this time, because there was nothing left in her to shake. "She can call me what she likes. It don't change one crumb of what's in their mouths. They're eating my whole life out there, and laughing while they do it, and they'll go home and forget my face by Monday like she said, and the bread'll still have been mine. That's all I get. That's all a woman like me ever gets. The work and the knowing of it." Her voice cracked just once on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and made it stop. Now, the cake. What Abigail did not know, what no one in the kitchen could know, was that on the other side of that wall, Ethan Walker had heard every word. He had been seated at the head of the long table beside his new-made bride, and he had heard Mrs. Ashby's question, and he had felt the room turn happy and warm, and he had thought for half a hopeful second that here at last was a chance to do a small right thing, that Charlotte would name the woman, and the woman would get her due. And then he had heard his wife call her a fat kitchen widow, and reduce 3 days of labor and a lifetime of skill to a punchline. And he had heard 200 people. He was now bound to laugh, and he had felt something in his chest that had been bending for 2 days finally quietly break. He set down his fork. The woman beside him, the woman whose name he now shared, was still smiling at the room basking. She did not notice. The senator was saying something to her. The Ashbys were laughing. The whole bright machine of it rolled on. "Charlotte," Ethan said. She turned, the smile still on. "Yes, darling. Her name is Abigail Carter." The smile flickered. "What?" "The cook. The one you just called what you called her." His voice was low, but the table had gone quiet again, the way a table does when it senses something under the words. "Her name is Abigail Carter. Her husband's dead. Her farm's failing, because the winter took her herd, same winter took half the herds in this county, including some of mine. She learned to cook feeding harvest crews when she was 9 years old. She has fed 200 of your guests tonight with more skill in her 2 hands than most men have in their whole lives." He was standing now, though he did not remember deciding to. "And you hid her behind a door so the picture wouldn't be spoiled." "Ethan." Charlotte's voice had gone sharp and low. "Sit down. You're making a scene at your own wedding. I asked for a minute, he said, during the vows. You'll recall, who told himself a marriage like ours was just business. He looked down at her, and the whole room was watching now. 200 faces. The senator with his glass half raised. Charlotte's mother rising from her chair. I've been telling myself for a year that I could marry your name and keep my own soul in a separate drawer. That a man could do that. I don't believe it anymore. I stopped believing it about a minute ago when I heard the woman I married laugh at a widow she'd never fed and never thanked, and heard a room full of people I meant to call my own laugh-along. Ethan Walker. Charlotte's mother was on her feet now, her voice like a whip. You will sit down and finish this wedding. This wedding is finished, Ethan said. The room made a sound, a single sharp intake of 200 breaths, and in the kitchen, Tessa, frozen once more at the door, turned to Abigail with her face gone white as the cake between them, and could not even find the words to say what she was hearing. And Abigail set down the cake knife very slowly, because through the wall, over the rising clamor, she had just heard a man say her name, to a room full of strangers. Say it plain and whole and unashamed. Abigail Carter. The way a man names something he has decided to defend. And the quiet thing inside her, that had set itself down so finally, a moment ago, lifted its head. What's he saying? Abigail breathed. Tessa, what is he saying? But Tessa couldn't answer because Charlotte's voice had risen now to a pitch that carried through the wall without any need to listen for it all. The sweetness burned off it, raw and shaking with fury. You are humiliating me. You are humiliating my family. In front of Senator Hale, in front of every name that matters in this territory, over a cook. Over a fat nobody who'll be gone in 2 days. Have you lost your mind? Maybe, Ethan said, and his voice was steady, terribly steady. Or maybe I found it. I can't tell yet. But I know I can't say the vows I just said, and mean them not to a woman who'd do what you did tonight, and I won't stand up here and lie in front of God and 200 people just to keep a cattle contract and a famous name. Sit down. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and he said it to the room, to the senator, to the Ashbys, to all of them. I am sorry to have brought you here for this, but there's a woman behind that kitchen door who's been treated tonight like she isn't a person, and she fed every one of you, and not one of you knew her name, and I find I can't go on as though that's a small thing. It isn't a small thing. It's the whole thing. He stepped back from the table. I'll not be marrying today. And he turned in front of 200 frozen guests, in front of his shrieking bride and her thunderstruck mother and the senator, with his glass still half raised, and he walked not away from the room. Tessa would tell it, after, not out the front door, like a man fleeing. He walked the length of that whole great room, toward the one door he'd been told for 2 days to stay out of. Toward the kitchen, and on the other side of it, Abigail Carter heard the footsteps coming, that step she knew. Getting louder, closer, while Charlotte's voice climbed into something that wasn't words anymore, and 200 people erupted all at once, and she stood rooted to the floor, with her hand pressed flat against her own breaking heart, and she could not for the life of her tell whether what was thundering toward that door was the best thing that had ever happened to her, or the thing that would finally completely destroy what little she had left. The door swung open, and Ethan Walker stood in it, and the whole roaring house was at his back, and for the space of one breath, neither of them said a word. Then Abigail did the thing he did not expect. She did not weep. She did not thank him. She came around the table with the cake knife still in her hand, and her face white with something that was not gratitude. "What have you done?" she said. Ethan blinked. "Mrs. Carter, what have you done?" Her voice was shaking now, low and fierce. "You said my name. Out there. To all of them. You stood up at your own wedding and you said my name." "I did." "Do you know what you've done to me?" She set the knife down hard. "You've made me the woman who broke up the Beaumont wedding. By Monday, it'll be in every kitchen and every church and every store between here and Cheyenne. The fat widow who turned a rich man's head and ruined a marriage. That's the story now. That's my name now. I came here to cook for $40 and disappear, and you've gone and made me a scandal I'll be paying for the rest of my life." Abigail. Mrs. Carter to you. Her chest heaved. You don't get to call me by my given name. You haven't earned it. You walked in my kitchen twice with your hat off and decided you knew something about me, and just now you spent my whole reputation to make a point you wanted to make, to feel like a good man. Well, you'll go on being Ethan Walker, who owns half a county. And I'll be the woman they whisper about. She turned away from him. Get out of my kitchen. The cake's ready. Take it to your guests and let me finish my work and go home. For a moment he said nothing, and she thought fiercely, good, let him feel it. Then he said quietly, you're right. She turned back. You're right that I should have thought about what it costs you. He stood very still in the doorway with the chaos behind him. I've never had to count the cost of speaking my mind. A man like me, I say a thing and the world rearranges. I didn't think what it does to a woman who doesn't have that. That was thoughtless, and it was selfish, and I'm sorry for it. He didn't move toward her. But I want you to hear me say this, because it's true, and you deserve the truth, even if it cost you. I didn't stand up out there to be a good man. I stood up because I heard 200 people laugh at you, and I couldn't breathe. That's not the same as wanting to feel righteous. It's not even close. It don't matter what it was. Ethan Walker. The voice came from behind him, and it was not Charlotte's. It was her mother's, and Mrs. Beaumont came through the door with her daughter at her shoulder, and her face like a hatchet. And the kitchen, that had held 4 people, now held the wreckage of a wedding. You will come back to that room, Mrs. Beaumont said, and you will tell those people you've had a fit of nerves and you will marry my daughter within the hour, or I will see your name finished in this territory. I have the senator's ear. I have every bank between here and Denver. You think your cattle and your acres make you untouchable. I will make you a cautionary tale. I expect you will, Ethan said. You would throw away everything. Mrs. Beaumont's voice climbed. Everything. Your alliances. You're standing my daughter over a fat kitchen woman. And there it was again. The same word thrown a third time like it could not miss. And this time, Charlotte stepped forward past her mother, and Charlotte's beautiful face had come undone, and she looked at Abigail with a hatred so naked, it was almost honest. You, Charlotte breathed. You did this. You sat back there in your grease and your flour, and you cast some kind of... Her voice broke. You took him, a widow, a nothing, a woman the size of a barn door. How? How did you... I didn't take anything, Abigail said. You must have. You must have said something to him, done something. I told him to leave my kitchen, Abigail said. And her voice was suddenly strangely calm. The calm of a woman who has stopped being afraid of a thing she has been afraid of her whole life. Twice. I told him he was getting married and he had no business drinking coffee at my table. I told him whatever he was feeling wasn't real. It was just nerves and a smell that reminded him of his mama. I sent him back to you, Miss Beaumont. Every single time. I am the one who told him to marry you. Charlotte stared at her. You want to know how I took him? Abigail went on. And now she was not calm at all. Now 3 years of being looked past was rising up out of her in a slow tide. I didn't. You gave him to me. You and your mother and your senator and your fine families. You stood in this kitchen and called me a thing in front of a girl of 16, and your mother called me a thing, and you went out there in your white dress, and you called me a fat kitchen widow to 200 people and made them laugh. And he heard it. That's all that happened, Miss Beaumont. He heard who you are. I didn't take him from you. You showed him to himself, and he couldn't stand what he saw. She took a breath. I never said one word against you. I didn't have to. You did all your own work. The kitchen had gone dead silent. Charlotte's mouth opened and shut. Mrs. Beaumont's hatchet face had gone a strange gray color, and in the doorway behind them, Abigail saw the guests had begun to gather, drawn by the noise, the senator and Mrs. Ashby and a dozen others peering into the kitchen they had eaten from all night, finally laying eyes on the woman who had fed them. And Abigail Carter, who had spent 3 days being kept behind that door so the picture wouldn't be spoiled, stood in full view of every one of them in her flour and her grease and her too big apron, and did not shrink. "Mrs. Ashby," she said, and the fine lady startled at being named. "You asked who made the bread. It was me, Abigail Carter. The salt-rising sponge takes 3 days, and you'll not get it from any house in Denver, because they don't have the patience for it there. I'm glad you liked it. It's the last thing of mine you'll ever eat, so I'm glad it was good." Mrs. Ashby, to her credit, looked stricken. "My dear, I had no idea. I would never have—" "I know you wouldn't," Abigail said, not unkindly. "That's the thing nobody understands. It ain't the cruel ones do the most harm. It's all the kind folks who never think to ask a name." She turned to Ethan. "Including you, Mr. Walker. You came in here twice and asked me 100 questions, and you never once asked the question that mattered, which was whether I wanted to be your reason for anything. You decided I was. You decided it for me. Same as everybody decides things for a woman like me. The only difference is, you decided something kind." Her voice dropped. "But it's still you deciding. And I have had enough of being decided about to last me the rest of my days." Ethan took this without flinching, which she gave him credit for later. "Then I won't decide," he said. "Tell me what you want. I'll do it." "I want to finish my work, collect my $40, and go home to my farm," Abigail said. "That's what I want. And I want every one of you out of my kitchen." And the strangest thing happened then. The senator, an old man who had said nothing through all of it, cleared his throat and said, "You heard the cook," and stepped back and offered Mrs. Ashby his arm. And the gathered guests began in 2s and 3s, awkward and murmuring, to withdraw. Mrs. Beaumont was not so easily moved. "Charlotte, we are leaving, tonight. And by God, I will ruin every one of them, the cook and the coward both." "Ruin away," Ethan said wearily. "I find I don't care anymore. You can have the cattle contract. You can have my standing. Tell the territory whatever you like. I'll be at my ranch, and I'll be a man I can stand to look at, which is more than I'd have been an hour ago." Charlotte was crying now, ugly and real, all the performance gone, and for one moment, Abigail almost felt for her. This woman who had been raised to believe a wedding was a picture, and people were furniture, and who had just learned in front of 200 witnesses that you cannot arrange a human heart the way you arrange a table. "I hope," Charlotte said, her voice wet and shaking, looking not at Ethan, but at Abigail. "I hope he leaves you too, someday. I hope he wakes up and sees what everyone sees, and I hope it breaks you in half." "He might," Abigail said quietly. "Folks leave. I've buried the one who didn't. But I'll tell you what I learned standing behind that door for 3 days, Miss Beaumont, and you can keep it free the way your housekeeper gave me her advice. A woman who needs a man to make her real was never real to begin with. I was a person before he walked in this kitchen. I'll be a person after he walks out. That's the one thing none of you can give me and none of you can take." She picked up her apron and wiped her hands. "Now go home and take your mother." And Charlotte Beaumont, who had come into that kitchen 3 times to remind a widow of her place, turned and left it for the last time without another word, because there was nothing left to say that Abigail had not already said better. The house emptied over the next hour the way a flood drains slow, and then all at once. Wagons and carriages, the rustle of 200 people who would carry the story to every parlor in the territory. Tessa wept and laughed and wept again, and could not stop saying it. You stood right up to her, ma'am, right up to all of them, until Abigail told her gently to go on home to her own mother and take a slice of cake for her trouble. And then near midnight, the great house was quiet, and Abigail was alone in the kitchen with the wreckage of a banquet, scrubbing pots that no longer needed scrubbing, because she did not know what else to do with her hands. When she heard the step behind her, she had told herself she would not listen forever again. "You're still here," she said, not turning. "It's my house," Ethan said. Then, "That was a poor joke. I'm sorry. I came to give you your $40. She heard him set the money on the table. "And to say you were right, about all of it. I had no business making you the center of something you didn't ask to be in." "You did." "I did." A pause. "I won't keep you. The road's clear. I had one of the men ready your wagon." Another pause longer, and his voice, when it came again, was lower, stripped of everything. "I just wanted to say one true thing before you go, and then I'll let you go, and I won't trouble you again. May I?" Abigail set down the pot. She did not turn around. Her heart was going so hard she was certain he could hear it across the room. "Say it then," she said. "And then I'm going home." "Say it then," she said again. "And then I'm going home." Ethan was quiet so long she almost turned to see if he'd lost his nerve. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of a man holding something with both hands, so it won't fall. "My mother died last winter holding my hand," he said, "and the last thing she asked me was whether I'd found anybody who saw me. Not my land, not my name. Me. And I lied to her. I told her yes, I had Charlotte. Everything was settled so she could go easy. She knew it was a lie. She squeezed my hand the way you do when you're telling somebody you forgive them for something. And then she was gone, and I spent the year since trying to make the lie true by marrying it." He drew a breath. "And then a woman I hired for $40 looked at me across a work table like I was nobody special and asked me what I wanted and meant it, and I realized she was the first person in a year who'd asked me a single question that wasn't about what I could give them. That's the true thing, Mrs. Carter. You didn't see a bank or a boss or a name, you saw a man. And I have been starving for that so long I didn't know what it was when it finally fed me." Abigail's hands had gone still in the cooling water. "That's not enough," she said. "I know it isn't. You don't know me. You know 2 mornings of coffee. You know I can cook. You don't know I cry in the barn where nobody can hear because I'm ashamed to do it in the house Tom built. You don't know I've stopped going to church because I can't stand the way they pity me. You don't know what it does to a person, Mr. Walker, to be looked past for 3 years until you start wondering if maybe you really did disappear, if maybe they're right, and there's just less of you that counts." She turned around finally, and her face was wet, and she let him see it, all of it. "You stood up out there and called me real in front of 200 people, but you don't get to decide I'm real. I have to decide that. And some days I can't. Some days I look in the glass and I see exactly what she sees. A fat widow nobody chose. What happens on those days, Mr. Walker? When the smell of the bread wears off and you wake up beside a woman the size of a barn door who cries in the barn, what happens then?" "I don't know," Ethan said. "That's the wrong answer. It's the only honest one I've got." He took one step toward her, just one, and stopped asking with his stillness for permission to come no closer until she granted it. "I don't know what happens on the bad days. I've never had a person long enough to find out. But I know what I won't do because I watched what I almost became tonight. I won't keep you behind a door. I won't be ashamed of you in front of a single living soul. And I won't decide you're real. You're right. That's not mine to do." He swallowed. "But I'll be there on the days you can't. I'll say your name out loud on the days you've forgotten it. That's not deciding for you. That's just standing close enough to remind you what you already are." Abigail wiped her face with the back of her wrist, a rough farmwoman gesture, and gave a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. "You're a fool, Ethan Walker. I've been told. You threw away a senator and a cattle contract, and the finest name in the territory in front of 200 people. I did. For a cook you've known 3 days. For the only person in a year," he said, "who made me feel like staying alive was worth the trouble. Yes. I'd do it again right now. I'd do it slower and louder." And Abigail stood there in the ruined kitchen with $40 on the table, and a man across the room who had set fire to his whole life to keep from laughing at her. And she felt the thing she'd been crushing down for 3 days finally come all the way up, and it frightened her worse than any of it, because hope was the one thing she'd sworn off after Tom Hope being the thing that cost the most when it broke. So she did the only thing a sensible woman could do. "I'm still going home," she said. "Tonight. Now." Something in Ethan's face closed, but he nodded. "All right. Don't you all write me like a whipped dog. Listen." She picked up the $40 and folded it into her apron pocket. I'm going home because I have got to be a woman who can stand on her own 2 feet before I can stand next to anybody. I will not be rescued, Mr. Walker. I will not be the widow you saved at your own wedding. If I let you carry me out of this kitchen tonight, then she was right. Then I was nothing till a rich man chose me, and I would rather die on my failing farm than live one day believing that. She lifted her chin. So I'm going home. And I'm going to work my land, and I'm going to fail or not fail on my own. And if you want me, if you truly want me, and not the feeling of being seen, then you'll know where to find me. And you'll come not as Ethan Walker who owns half a county, but as a man calling on a woman. And you'll keep coming season after season the slow way until I believe it. And maybe I never will, and you'll have wasted a great deal of writing for nothing. She took a breath. Those are my terms. I don't have land or a name to bargain with, but I've got myself, and I've finally remembered that's worth bargaining over. Ethan Walker looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she did not expect. He smiled. A real one the first she'd seen reach his eyes. Mrs. Carter, he said, that is the finest thing anybody's said to me in a year. He picked up his hat from the table and held it to his chest. I'll come Sunday, with my hat off, as a man calling on a woman. And I'll come the Sunday after that, and the one after for as long as it takes. And if it takes forever, then I reckon I'll have spent my Sundays better than any man in the territory. He stepped back to let her pass. Go on home, Abigail. I'll see your wagon to the road. She stopped in the doorway. I didn't say you could call me Abigail. No, he agreed. You didn't. I'm hoping to earn it by about the 3rd Sunday. And despite everything, despite the ruined night and the long road home and the failing farm waiting in the dark, Abigail Carter laughed full and real, and it was the first time she had laughed since they put Tom in the ground. He came that Sunday, hat off on the porch of a sagging house with no senator and no contract and no audience to perform for just a man on the step of a woman's home asking if he might sit a while. And Abigail, who had told herself 100 times that week that she would send him away, found that she did not. He came the Sunday after that, and they did not talk of the wedding or of Charlotte, who had gone back to Denver and married a banker within the year, and was, by all accounts, exactly as unhappy as she had taught herself to be. They talked of cattle and weather and the salt-rising sponge, and he learned that her laugh came easier the more she used it, and she learned that he listened the way few men did, with his whole still body, asking and asking, until she ran out of the careful answers and got down to the true ones. He came when the herd she was rebuilding lost 2 calves to the cold, and he did not offer to buy her new ones because he had learned by then that offering to fix a thing for Abigail Carter was the surest way to lose her. He offered to help her dig instead, and they buried the calves together in the hard ground. And afterward she made coffee, and they did not say much, and that was the Sunday she called him Ethan. It took longer than 3 Sundays. It took the better part of a year, and there were bad days, days. She cried in the barn, and days she told him not to come and meant it. And on those days he did not come, because he had learned that too, that standing close did not mean standing on top of a person. But he came back. He always came back. And slowly, the way the salt-rising sponge does its quiet work over 3 days, while no one watches the thing between them, rose into something that would hold. There was a wedding in the end, but it was nothing like the one that had collapsed in that great room. There was no senator and no Mrs. Ashby and no 200 guests. There was Tessa, grown a year older, crying happy tears in the front row. There was the old preacher who'd held the book that other day who said afterward he'd never been so glad a wedding got interrupted. There was Abigail Carter in a dress she'd made herself, standing in full view of everyone who came, not hidden behind any door, the woman who had made the feast, and was this time the feast's whole reason. And when the preacher asked Ethan Walker whether he took this woman, Ethan looked at the room, at the handful of people who had come, not because they mattered in the territory, but because they loved the two getting married. And he said loud enough for every one of them to hear, I do, and her name is Abigail, and I want every soul here to know it." And the room laughed. But it was the other kind of laughing, the warm kind, the kind that includes a person instead of cutting her out. Abigail had thought in the worst of those 3 days behind the kitchen door that the most a woman like her could hope for was the work and the knowing of it. That she would feed the world its finest meals, and the world would never learn her name, and she had made a hard peace with that, the way you make peace with a winter you cannot change. She had been wrong. The work had been hers all along, yes. But it turned out she was too. Not because a man rode up and made her real. He hadn't. She'd done that herself the night she stood in her own ruined kitchen and remembered she was a person before anyone walked in and would be a person after anyone walked out. He had only done the one thing she'd asked, the slow thing, the standing close thing, until she could believe with her own 2 hands what she'd had to say with her mouth before she felt it. Years later, when folks asked her how it happened, how the wedding cook nobody was supposed to see ended up the wife of the man whose wedding she'd been hired for, Abigail Carter, would set down whatever she was needing and wipe her hands on her apron and tell them the truth. She would tell them she had not been chosen. She had been recognized. And there is all the difference in the world between the two, because a woman who is chosen can be set aside, but a woman who is finally truly seen can never again be made invisible by anyone.